Hello, bonjour, shalom, and welcome to Hi There.
A culturally Jewish podcast powered by AJN.
Hi There, like hi there, but with a little more life in it.
18 times more life, technically. I'm Addie.
And I'm David, and each week we sit down with interesting people to talk about culture, identity, and the stories that shape us. Some people have one identity, some people have two. Today's guest somehow decided that nurse, drag performer, advocate, and community builder all needed to fit on the same resume.
We're joined by Ashley Kravetsky, an Edmonton-based advocate whose work sits at the intersection of queer identity, Jewish identity, and creating community where people feel seen.
Which honestly sounds exhausting.
But important.
Indeed. We talk about identity, belonging, and what it means to take up space authentically.
So, here's our conversation with Ashley Kravetsky. Awesome. Thank you so much, Ashley, for joining us today. One of the questions that David was kind of thinking about to propose first was, nurse by day, drag performer by night, feels like the beginning of a very specific superhero origin story. Which came first?
Actually, it's funny. They kind of came synonymously, actually. So when I was in nursing school, I was looking for a creative outlet, and I started doing makeup pretty regularly, and have my own makeup business now. And when I was doing makeup, I did a lot of makeup for people who were doing drag for the very first time, or needing some makeup tips or lessons. And so that kind of became part of my business. And in doing so, I met a lot of really amazing artists, a lot of really great drag queens, and my drag mother actually and I worked together in a makeup counter. And I had always pitched to them, if I was a drag queen, this is what I would perform. If I was drag queen, this would be something I would do. And so my drag mother at the time was doing a charity event and needed performers, and said, "Hey, it's your time. You keep saying it, so let's put your money where your mouth is." And I started doing drag it'll be 7 years ago now. And yeah, kind of just started doing it for charity, for fundraising opportunities. And it kind of took off and became its own little thing in conjunction with doing nursing. And actually at one point it would be like, I'd do a show, get out of my drag, and then go work overnight in the emergency department.
With makeup still on in the ER, I imagine.
Yeah, not always. I'd find a random rhinestone here and there when I would be getting changed into my scrubs. Although one time I did stain my lips, and I overdrew my lips hugely. And so thank goodness we were mandated masks, because it looked like I had eaten a Kool-Aid pop or some sort of child's drink. And it was just a huge massive stain on my whole mouth.
That's so funny.
So for people maybe meeting you for the first time and they don't know much about you or your background, what parts of your identity have always felt maybe central to who you are, and which parts possibly took longer for you to fully embrace?
So I'm an immigrant, but my mom's originally from El Salvador. My dad's from Winnipeg. I grew up in the United States. And so we moved here when I was 7. And it was very, very obvious that not only was I darker skinned, but also marginalized in the sense of being a half Latina. It was also, I'm Jewish and on my dad's side. And so we moved into Stony Plain, tiny town where we were the Jewish population. And so it kind of initially started off being very obvious that I was not the same as everyone else. And people kind of deal with that in one of two ways. They either try to assimilate as best they can, or they're really loud and proud about it. And I chose the latter because I am very loud and proud of it as a human in general. And because, I'm technically a converted Jew because it's my dad who's Jewish. And so there was always a bit of imposter syndrome. So after my bat mitzvah, I wasn't super active in the Jewish community. When I went to university, I didn't really, join into Hillel or anything, because I kind of had that imposter syndrome, right? Where, I'm a converted Jew. People aren't going to look at me the same. I didn't grow up going to Talmud Torah or any of the local community groups. I was sort of always detached that way. So I really didn't want break into the Jewish community until after I started doing drag. All drag queens have a shtick and a persona. And so my shtick and my persona was being Latina and being Jewish. And I really highlighted and got to know more about my identities in performing and being visible. And so that was something I really drove me to continue doing drag. I would often do a lot of numbers that were, Rachel Bloom or, Jewish artists, or songs about the holidays when it was over the, holiday season. And that kind of pushed me to keep being more active and involved in the Jewish community, because how could I be a visible Jew and not know enough and not be involved within our own community here?
From different aspects and different parts of your life, do you see many of those values kind of aligning and a lot of similarities between all of them? The Jewish portion of your life, the queer portion of your life, the Latina portion of your life, all of that?
Absolutely. I think for me, one of the biggest things I loved about drag was that it was very much a push to be inclusive. People wanted to have all different identities showcased and highlighted and celebrated. And, the more I helped to do the first all Latin cast drag show here in the city. I would be that person who was like, hey, love your Christmas show, but why don't you call it a holiday show and include this little Jewish gal, because it was always being a part of like celebrating that there are so many different types of folks in every different community. And it was a really great way of connecting. I mean, I would do drag brunches and do like a cute little Jewy number and then have people come beside me and after the show being like, thank you for representing us. I'm also Jewish, but I just don't talk about it. Or I'm also Jewish, but people don't know that. And so to be able to see someone proudly and loudly being a Jew in the queer community was like not something you see very often.
You might be the first person I know who sort of said they found their path, or they refound their path in Judaism through drag. It's not something you tend to hear quite often. So I'm fascinated by that, because you were able to find a vehicle or something to return through that because of the openness and because of the acceptance. Is that what I'm really hearing?
I have such bad imposter syndrome, like I said, as a converted Jew, as an immigrant, as a half Latina. I've always been kind of felt like I wasn't, fill in the blank enough. And so with drag, being a cisgendered woman, like a biological female who identifies as female, doing female drag was something that wasn't necessarily the most accepted in the drag community. So even just doing that, I already had this like imposter syndrome of not being draggy enough.
Yeah.
And so it kind of really, as I started booking shows and people started asking and creating my own little community within the drag community, I realized there was so much more that I could talk about while entertaining people and being silly, And so that's, and humor. And I mean, what are we known for as Jews? Like Jewish humor is always just its own beautiful niche. And so to bring that out and be able to present it in a way that made people laugh and brought them joy, but also gave them the message that like, we're here. And, you hear it all the time. We're here, we're queer, and we're not going anywhere. Well, that was like, I'm here, I'm queer, I'm Jewish, I'm Latina, and I'm not going anywhere. That was always my kind of like, hey, I can just keep adding on to this and just be like, let's celebrate all this diversity within just this character.
And also you brought up too, you are biologically female, and I'm not sure if these are unwritten rules or rules, but I would think normally you're going to say, well, if you're born a woman, you might be performing as, a drag king. You've decided that's not your avenue, that's not your milieu. You are going to be a drag queen.
Yeah. And so, and a lot of cisgendered women are in our drag community and really celebrated, which I'm so proud of. That like, I wasn't the pioneer, but I definitely saw how hard some of the other women in the community fought to have that space and be those people. And so I was so glad to carry on that legacy. And, a lot of cisgendered women, they tend to do more of like a burlesque drag hybrid, but I am a traditionalist when it came to drag. So like I padded and wore the 5 pairs of tights like the men did. And I wore a corset, and my poor brother came to watch a show once when I was performing down in Calgary, and he watched a few burlesque performers and other drag performers, and he looked at me during the intermission and said, please tell me you're not stripping, because I love you. I want to support you, but I'm not prepared for that. And I said, oh, no, that's not my type of drag. I put way more clothes on than take them off. He's like, oh, thank goodness, but like that beauty of like hybriding drag and burlesque is something that like a lot of the cisgendered women in this community do, and it's really beautiful and has actually helped to open up burlesque for being more accepted, not just in with the women in our community, but also the other or but also men in the community too, and people who are non-gender conforming that are actually amazing, beautiful drag and or burlesque artists, which is a really cool crossover, if you will.
I think about one of the most important things within, our community of being the Jewish community is that representation.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's when you come from a city or a place such as Stony Plain where there's not a lot of that representation and community, it can be really hard to be like that part of you felt seen and
Right.
heard. And we all have a moment growing up into our futures where we kind of have that switch for us. Were you able to experience that when you moved into drag?
I really did, up to October 7th, I really felt that me just being present and having a say, and like I was an active member of a lot of different fundraising organizations, a lot of different queer initiatives, um, just because I wanted that ability to be seen. And it was because I was working within an organization. We went to Pride Shabbat to represent, the drag and queer community. And it fell into my lap because, hey, you're a Jew, you know what this is about. Do you want to go to this Pride Shabbat that we got invited to? And so I went, um, and saw how many people in our Jewish community were queer supporting and or queer. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm not alone in there either. And I've sort of always been the lone shark in a lot of big communities. It was a cool realization of like, hey, we exist here and we need each other for support. And so like, that's what sort of got me working with the Federation. I chair the queer committee that we have. The LGBTQ committee. I chair it now for the Federation. And it's really gotten and given me opportunity to speak out about being someone who is a minority within a minority. It's really helped me to like cross um, and meet other Jewish queer folks, but also people in our communities that maybe don't understand us, and find those like nice bridges so that we can all support each other, which has been really great. So it's kind of a snowball effect, really, and I feel like the more loud and proud you are of who you are, people take notice, and then they're like, you might know this person, or hey, can I introduce you to this person because of the circles that you're running into.
Now, you did bring up October 7th, and I do want to talk about it because for a lot of Jewish people, it changed something internally even before it changed anything for them externally. Did you feel that shift personally?
I've always had dissent even within the queer community about inclusion. I pushed for an organization I worked with used to do a Christmas pageant, and I really pushed and advocated for it to be renamed as to the holiday pageant. There would be times where people would be wanting to do themed shows that were very Christian centric, and I would be like, hey, there's not just Christians or, people in this community who do celebrate those things. Let's change it to something else so that it can be more inclusive. That wasn't always met with gratitude. Sometimes that was a fight because we live in such a Christian culture anyways. Sometimes it's hard for people to take they may have taken the religion out of the culture, but for us as Jews, like that still exists. And so helping to sort of advocate for that, not just for me, the one Jewish drag performer that was openly and blatantly Jewish, but also for the folks who were of other denominations or maybe just weren't religious at all, that didn't feel comfortable about being a part of those things.
So that's what you were dealing with pre-October 7th. And then what happened? Did you feel a shift personally in that post-October 7th world?
Well, absolutely. I think after October 7th, I started seeing a lot more people who were standing alongside me to advocate for equality and advocate for recognition of those minorities and folks who are marginalized in our communities, start to sort of post things and be very vocal about where they stood in that conflict. And maybe not really understanding that the verbiage that they were using or the things they were sharing or advocating for were potentially harmful to the Jewish community here. And, I had some really personal conversations. I mean, at one point with certain people, I'd be like, hey, let's take out the organizational structure. Let's just talk about this as like humans, people to people, friends. And like put yourself into my shoes and imagine opening up your social media and seeing everyone that you've been caring about, working for, working with and along is now blatantly saying things that are harmful and that put you at risk. and really trying to reach out. Never once did I say, like, you need to agree with me, you need to be on my side, because I don't believe in a side. I am a human that very much is anti-war. I didn't want any of this sort of thing to happen. I want peace just as much as I think the majority of us Jewish people want. But it was like, let's engage in conversation. And I found it wasn't always reciprocated, and especially when it was like, I'm not telling you you're wrong. I'm not telling you that I'm right, but I'm telling you, like, hey, can you put yourself in my shoes for a minute? Can you take a look at my perspective? And that was met with some real harsh dissent and unwillingness, which I hadn't experienced before October 7th. Yes, there'd be people who didn't agree with me, but we could have conversations about it. Whereas all of a sudden I was just told that I'm wrong and they're right, and I'm harmful and they're not. And there was no room for us to have a conversation about it.
I remember back in high school, I was working with the Student Senate here at Edmonton Public School, and I was like, I want to coordinate an event that has to do with interfaith relations, and I'd like to do it soon. And the one of the guys I hosted it with was Palestinian, and I was pitching this event to the group, and I was like, hey guys, like, I'm Jewish, and I'm really proud of it, but I'm also a really big advocate for interfaith relations, and that is a really important thing to me, having a Christian dad and a Jewish mom, and with my grandparents also being Christian and Jewish. And after that meeting, he comes up to me, he was like, Addie, like, I want to tell you this, I'm Palestinian, but it meant so much to me that you said that, and you want to do this, and I want to do this with you. And people don't understand the feeling of how it just, like, it makes your heart feel so good. He might not say, I agree with the things that you stand with, but at the end of the day, as long as they recognize and they listen, that's what's important.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And like, once October 7th happened, I remember sitting down, there was another drag performer in our community who is Muslim and is a refugee. And we sat down and had a conversation about how we would never sit down and have a conversation about the Middle Eastern conflict, because regardless of our points of view, we knew that A, it would be an argument that would take far too much effort and time for us to sit down and commit to, and B, it didn't matter because we loved and respected each other, and we knew that we understood each other in a way that people who weren't Palestinian or weren't Muslim or Jewish wouldn't understand. So I actually really, really, like, they were somebody I checked in with and was like, am I harming you? Because if I'm not harming you, I want to make sure I'm doing the things to rectify that. But as a Jewish person, I don't want to ostracize your community. And they were very much, as a Muslim person, I don't want to ostracize you. And there's nothing that is going on over there that is going to make me change my mind about who you are as a human, and more importantly, who you are as my friend, because you've been there and you've supported me.
Exactly.
And that sort of recognition and that understanding why it doesn't happen with people who don't have any skin in the game, who are virtue signaling or speaking as if they know about the conflict and understand the history of the area in a way that, like, really and truly only people who come from there or have lived experience really get. It was sort of like a moot point at that point, and so when I started getting canceled and all the negativity that was happening post October 7th was being directed towards me, I did shoot them a message every now and then being like, are we okay still? And they would just be like, yeah, you're great. I have nothing but love and respect for you.
As we're talking about all this, and it seems very, very positive and very upbeat, because I'm thinking of a lot of advocacy through the Jewish organizations are always about being, reactive, responding to hate, responding to an incident that's come up, and how do we fight against this, or how do we band together? And I'm curious, you seem to be taking more of a proactive Jewish empowerment route. I want to know what that looks like to you and how you sort of go down that pathway, as opposed to sort of saying we have to be on guard and we have to defend. And I guess really what I'm asking is, what does Jewish joy and maybe Jewish queer joy look like for you?
Oh man, it's been a long, long journey to get here, because there was a lot of like self-reflection. There was a lot of times where I would be like, am I wrong here? Am I pushing away a community that really and truly I should be standing and fighting harder in? And a lot of my first year post October 7th, post doing drag, was actually coming to terms with like, am I still a good person? Because I was being told left, right, and center by all these people whom I thought loved me that I wasn't good enough and I was a terrible person. And that my favorite quote, I'm not an anti-Semite, but here's all the reasons why you're wrong and are hurtful. And so like to really process that took me a lot of time. And the reality that sort of I saw after I was picking up my own pieces was that other people were in this situation. And really and truly, there were burlesque performers from Canada and the United States that like were going through the same thing that I was. And then just artists in general whom were no longer able to be in their spaces because of their faith. And I started connecting with those folks. And I realized that, whilst all the therapy was being very helpful and getting me to like deal with the issues and the conflict itself, it was the people who knew how I felt and the connections that I was making with these other Jewish folks that maybe I would never have made. We did a Zoom group meeting through a wider bridge with other Jewish artists from all over the world. And we had people from all over the world joining in. And yeah, I mean, part of it was a bit of a like, this is what happened to me, but also it was like, wow, look at you amazing artists. Look at all the really cool things that you have done. One of the burlesque performers wrote a book of poetry that is absolutely amazing. And so, I was one of the first that wanted to buy it because I just like, we started supporting each other. And I realized no matter what we say, no matter what we do on social media, we're going to be villainized. We're not going to be Jewish enough. We're going to be too Jewish. We're going to be too Zionist. We're not going to be Zionist enough. If we're anti-Zionist, it doesn't matter. We're looking and watching all these people who have never had a stance in their life getting, harassed and bullied for having some sort of semblance of Jewish connection. And I was like, this isn't going to make things better. So what I'm going to do is work on just being the kind human and the open, inclusive human that I've always been, and invite people into my space. And that itself has been what has given me the joy. I've had opportunities to like meet other Jewish leaders within Canada and did a couple-year program in which we got to like really talk about some of the issues that we're facing. And then I got to go last year to Israel on a Jewish Pride trip. And it wasn't until I was standing in a room with 99 other Jewish folks who were all queer and like realizing how much I missed the joy of being all of myself. There's nothing better than as like a Jewish queer woman to walk through a door during breakfast and everyone else being like, girl, you look so fabulous. And like that affirmation, or being able to talk about drag with people, that was just like, hey, we're all on that same page and we all know that same pain. So we don't even have to talk about it because we're already here and we can just focus on having that joy and having those connections and meeting each other and loving each other the way that we need to be loved and haven't been for the last few years.
And that's all what we want at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And so that's kind of my mindset. There isn't a lot of Jewish queer folks in our community. And unfortunately, after all this stuff started publicly happening with me, I was getting message from other Jewish queers being like, see, this is why we don't talk about being Jewish in queer spaces. And I'm not that person. I just can't be that person. I do understand and I can appreciate the closeting, but I have closeted so much of myself in so many different ways that I wasn't going to allow that to happen again. And so just being loud and proud, I've discovered colleagues at work who are Jewish that I didn't necessarily know. One of the doctors I wished a Shabbat Shalom on when we were working on a Friday night, and he was like, nobody's ever wished me a Shabbat Shalom on Shabbat at work. And it's just never felt so good, and it's just like that connection, last year when the Bibas family was brought home, I had so many emotions about it and I was feeling so sad. And one of the doctors I work with, her and I just looked at each other and embraced and cried together. And it was just the most cathartic moment of like, if I am closeted, if I am quiet, if I'm not big about who I am, I would never have gotten those supportive moments and those beautiful connections. And so I think that that's really should be our focus, being proud, being joyous, celebrating, not just with our own people, but with everyone. And I think that on its own is going to show people that we are not the horrible terrible people that people are trying to make us into on social media.
I speak as also as another performer in the performing arts too, and it felt like for the first year you were siloed in your own world, and it really took these kind of meetings that we were having across the country to talk and sort of say, these are our experiences. It felt great to share, but it also felt even better to make these connections with other Jewish artists, to know that we are not alone and that there are other people going through similar things. That was my therapy for the first year. But I want to briefly touch upon what you said, and were you in Tel Aviv for Pride?
I was.
Okay, how was that?
It was very interesting. So we were there about a week before, and I got to meet I got to go to the Pride Center in Tel Aviv and meet the founder of the Pride Center. I got to go talk to trauma surgeons and talk about how like the medical community and like the things they're doing post October 7th to better combat mortality, how they're helping people in other communities. I met beautiful community members and organizations that were helping queer folks find asylum in Israel or other countries. There's an amazing program in Israel that helps people get PrEP and HIV testing discreetly, so that if they are in more Orthodox or conservative religious sections, they can keep their anonymity. And like, we did this amazing tour. You know, I got to see the Nova site. I got to spend time in Sderot and places that were really affected by October 7th, and hear survivor stories and listen to what had actually happened and some of the things that, you know, the government is dealing with, some of the things the media is dealing with. I met the president. You know, it was so cool to just be able to sit and talk and have such gratitude and appreciation. People kept thanking us, like, thank you for coming and representing the queer community outside of this community. You know, people don't realize Tel Aviv Pride is like as big as it is. And I was so excited. You know, I packed these huge rainbow platform sandals. I packed carry-on. I traveled with just a carry-on, but I had these huge platform rainbow sneakers to wear for Pride. And I was so excited. It's one thing to be Jewish and queer in Tel Aviv, you know, where there's rainbow flags everywhere and Pride is celebrated and it's very loud and it's amazing. But we were really fortunate that we were on a Federation trip. We were helped to get out safely through Jordan and actually into Egypt. And as we're like leaving and as we're getting into Jordan, I realized, like, you know, here I was celebrating all of who I was. And now I can really see from the other perspective of what it's like to be a person who is maybe Jewish or queer in another country that wasn't so accepting. And that sort of contrast was really, you know, whilst I don't think I'd ever want to do it again, I'm so grateful for that experience, because it did really give me perspective and made me realize how ignorant I was. You know, we were in Jordan, and I was asking some of the because we went and saw some ruins, and so there were lots of people selling their wares when we were at the ruins and stuff. And I said, like, why, you know, and we were talking about the Middle Eastern conflicts and everything, and I said, like, how come you're not getting lots of Palestinians into your country? How come this is happening? Like, what is your perspective? Because one of them didn't speak any English, but as the bombs were going off overhead, he was clapping and pointing and going Trump and giving me thumbs up. And I was like, wow, this is such an interesting perspective, because that's not something I think I would have realized that I would have been so grateful for if I hadn't been there and seen it myself, you know?
So you mentioned that this was arranged through the Federation, the Jewish Federation, this trip. What other things are they doing to help advocate for queer Jews?
Like I said, I sit and I chair the committee. I've been trying to push for more like just gatherings of people, and not just necessarily Jewish queer folks, but queer folks who don't want to be in spaces where they have to have a stance. Because that's the biggest thing I've noticed in our community, is that there is a lot of, if you're not with me, you're against me. And that's not always the case. And some people don't have that capacity to have political view or advocate the way that certain people want them to advocate. And so for me, what I've loved about the Federation is I've never been told I'm not Jewish enough, or I'm not, you know, I'm a tattooed and alternative person. I could very well have been turned away from the Federation and been like, you don't really look like the type of person we want to have, but it didn't matter. And so, you know, Nate Looney put this together with the Federation, this Pride trip, and there was like I said, 100 of us that went. And since then we still have our group chat, we still talk to each other. I often see people will be in each other's areas and meeting up for events, or just a coffee, or just to get together. I have invitations from all over North America to stay with people. And the Federation has done a lot of partnership with, queer advocacy. There's Keshet, there's a lot of different organizations that are working within the Federation. And something that I really love is there isn't that many queer folks in our small, tiny city that are also Jewish. But as soon as you plug into the Federation, you've now got this hugely large group of folks that now you've networked with and that you get to know. And, one of my very good friends is a queer Jewish human in Winnipeg. And, I've gotten to know some of the Jewish queer folks in Vancouver because of Federation, and, doing these talks and having opportunities to speak to other members of communities, it sort of starts connecting everyone together. And I don't think that we would have that if we didn't have the Federation to sort of be that network and help us catalyze each other and learn from each other. But when you're 3 or 4 folks, active in your own community, it is hard to make that jump without something like the Federation.
So Ashley, what are some of the services offered by the Jewish Family Services in the Edmonton community, in the Edmonton area, that you're familiar with?
So actually, Jewish Family Services was part of my drag advocacy when I was doing drag, because they used to have a free non-denominational queer support group that was the only one in the city that was happening. And so when I was working within some of the drag organizations, one of the things we did was a drag brunch. And over the holidays, we would always donate the money towards Jewish Family Services, towards that queer support group, because it was so important for people, again, that idea of community and being able to find each other, and those who are struggling to have support and be able to have a way to reach out and get services. And post October 7th, I watched Jewish Family Services. They were advertising that if anyone was struggling with what was going on overseas in the Middle East, if there was things that were causing them grief, they were offering free counseling services for folks. And so as things started escalating and more conflict was happening, I realized that this was becoming bigger than I could manage on my own. And I actually reached out to JFS and still regularly go to a counselor at JFS to talk about some of the things that I've had to deal with in being a Jewish queer person and feeling very ostracized from that group of people. And so they lost a lot of their funding. They no longer have that queer support group. And I really, really, really hope that one day they can get that funding back to have it, because it made such a difference. And, my partner at the time, who was also a drag performer, and I actually did a guest, visit during one of their support group meetings to talk about what it was like because they were also not Jewish, how it was, it sort of touched on interfaith dating, and also being someone who doesn't understand what the conflict nearly to the extent, and supporting each other through those difficult times. JFS has done amazing work within our community in providing services and providing us with the opportunity to connect and find connection within the queer community as well.
I have one last question for you, just to end it off on a fun note. If you could put together your dream drag performance using one very Jewish song, what song are you choosing?
Well, that's a really good question. I think it would be super fun. And I mean, I've had a really great opportunities in doing some really beautiful Hanukkah numbers and stuff. But the idea of doing Matchmaker from Fiddler on the Roof and making it super queer and having just a bunch of folks being match made whilst you're performing that were of all different expressions and genders, I think that would be so great and powerful. The idea in my world, I think that if we could have people all come together and sing Hatikva together and stand together in loving, proud support of just the idea of hope and peace, I think that would be so beautiful in a very different way.
Well, Ashley, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome, and thank you so much for having me. It's been a wonderful opportunity. As someone who is queer and no longer feels, safe in those spaces, if ever you guys have someone who's reaching out, looking for a community, looking for space, or even just somebody needing support from another queer person who understands what they're coming from, send them my way. I really think this is how we bring joy, is to find those connections. And I would love to find more of those connections within our communities. I know there's a lot of folks who are not feeling safe to walk into queer space alone. And I am so wanting to be that person, to be there to support them. And, whilst I don't do drag anymore, my goal and hope is that one day other folks who are Jewish can be openly loud and proud and be accepted into those spaces. And I would love to be able to share my experience and knowledge and support people who are willing to take those risks and do those things and be visibly joyous about who they are.
All the best.
Same to you guys.
We're back.
That was a really important conversation.
And I think one thing I kept coming back to in our conversation is how identity isn't always simple, but there's always something really powerful about people who choose to show up fully as themselves anyway.
And creating space for others to do the same.
Also, now I've learned I would be deeply unprepared for both drag makeup and Tel Aviv Pride.
Honestly, same.
All right, here's what's happening in your community.
On June 28th, Calgary Jewish Federation is hosting a Bridges of Faith Christian-Jewish allyship in our modern day.
Also on June 28th in the HOJMI parking lot, Calgary Jewish Federation, HOJMI, and the JCC are hosting their annual Kosher Stampede Breakfast. All are welcome to attend and enjoy pancakes, a bouncy castle, pony rides, and more.
In Edmonton, the Heritage Festival is coming up Saturday, August 1st to Monday, August 3rd at Horlack Park. Visit booths and pavilions from countless countries. The Israel Pavilion is seeking volunteers for several positions. Visit jewishedmonton.org for more information.
And save the date on Monday, September 7th for the annual Walk with Israel in Calgary. Meet the organizations that make up a Jewish Calgary, a children's carnival, Rosh Hashanah market, and more. Hi There is a culturally Jewish podcast powered by AJN. For more news, visit albertaJewishNews.com. Production by Real Mensch Studios.
Take care of yourselves
Take care of each other.
and call your mother.
Hi there.